to me grind. Take down the film watchers and nerds.
What's up? I wanted to come in with energy, just didn't happen, did it? Oh well. It's grind time, man. A lot of people putting out content. I want to get involved, but I'm too busy grinding to talk about how much I'm grinding. I've been trying to recreate pre-draft and post-draft models using some of the new stats we got in the database. I've been keeping the conversation going in Discord. Actually, if you're on Patreon and you're in the Discord, you know about the 3M posts and chains of ranting about how running backs are unpredictable and we should just replace them with kicker, or on Twitter for that matter. I can't do it everywhere. But yeah, I want to get these out of the way. I want to update the database with all the corrections I found to make, and also some new stats I've plugged in. Get my pre-draft scores done, and then I can actually start, like evaluating some players or something. So yeah, let's talk about the running back model. I did a video on the wide receiver model and how I updated that. And I've just done it with the running back. Lots of new people in the Discord. Hat tip to you guys. Really appreciate you staying tuned to ask nerdy type questions, and also, just keep me motivated, to be honest with you. I really appreciate it. And some of them have reminded me that I really need to not nerd out a little too hard. So, what you see on this side of me, which is this side for me, it's weird, is a plot with running back points per game, their average of the first 3 seasons. I only prospect this way using sample size of players that have played at least 3 years in the NFL, so that I can actually see, we actually have a pretty good idea of what they were. That's a pretty good idea, unless you're Derrick Henry, I guess. And then you get a pretty good idea of what a player is going to be in the NFL if you see the first 3 years. So I only use players from 2003 to 2018 or so with data that aren't hybrids, aren't listed as fullbacks, and all of that is listed. If you're ever wondering the conditions I put on my sample size and want to recreate it, go ahead, and I'll show you where that's at. But this funny orange number at the top, you see that? Yeah, that's called the R squared, just RSQ. It's normally abbreviated to. It's a mathematical formula essentially to calculate the distance between all those little blue dots and the orange line you see there. It's called a linear regression model because the line is straight. It's a linear, straight-lined model. You don't care about that, you don't need to, but that's what the number's representing. Essentially, sum total of how far off the prediction is from the actual result. So all those little blue dots are plotted against their actual points per game to what the pre-draft model I just designed says. So if you see that little blue dot on the far right, but it's really far below the orange line, can I point with my cursor on this thing? I think maybe, yeah, this little guy. Yeah, that's like, the model predicted 11.88 fantasy points per game on average through the first 3 seasons, and they got less than that. On the other hand, the players above that line scored a lot more points on average over the first 3 years than the model projected. And the orange line in the middle predicts the rough correlation between the two. As you see, there's an upward trend, but a strong block of players below the line, especially in the middle section. And if you do a little bit more digging down into this model, as with all NFL models that I've tested, you will find a skew to the data either to the right or left, which is actually bad, very bad. If you're a statistical data science type of guy, the histogram isn't great, but it's got some signal, and I worked pretty hard to find the right stats to combine in the right way, that it's actually giving a signal and not, numbers that look good in a graph, but are actually more to do with chance. And that all has to do with R squared, that your score you're seeing there, and the adjusted R squared when you actually run the model. But that's enough nerding, right? If you're interested, that bottom right guy, the 1.88 points projected, and scoring less than 2 points, less than 2 or 3 points per game over the 3 years. I'm pretty sure that's Jared Wolf, and if we look in the same percentile of his group, we also see everyone else kind of hit through the last few years. We've got Giovanni Bernard, Leonard Fournette, Adrian Peterson, Aaron Jones. Now, obviously, none of those running backs look similar, but their production did, which is why the pre-draft model is scoring them in a similar way. Limits and positives of pre-draft model kind of just jump out of the words I'm telling you when I say Bernard is somehow comparable to Adrian Peterson and Aaron Jones. That's both the beauty and the terribleness of prospecting through production, especially at the running back position. Again, if you're in Discord or on Twitter, you know I was literally suggesting we replace running backs with tight ends because they're unpredictable. It was a very tricky model to put together, especially trying to get adjusted R-squared somewhere into the realms of not chance and actual signal. Thankfully, a late night DM to Anthony Amico at Amico on Twitter. He's a football coach as well as a data science nerd like myself, so definitely check him out and follow. But he suggested I look up adjusted yards per team attempt instead of just yards per team attempt, which is what was in the database. So I added it. Essentially, you just multiplied receiving yards by 2, so you're giving an extra value to yards gained through the receiving game, which is really what we're trying to target, especially with production metrics for the running back position. And he said that had some signal and might help me out. So I put it in there, and I found Leslie suggested that the last year of a player's college career actually proved to be probabilistically the most statistically significant. And so that ended up in the model as well. But again, you can see all of that. I don't want to get too nerdy on a video on YouTube. So where did we end up coming to? Yeah, these are the line graphs that the regression model spat out for me, but the values are actually included in it. In fact, let's just go look at the pre-draft model in the R-squared table. I ended up using the first year of yards per team pass attempt. Now, my logic of or understanding of why is that tested out is relevant is if you've got a great player, you try to get them on the field as a typical logic, right? So even if they don't immediately dominate the position or become the running back one, you might get involved in some capacity, and the model's trying to search for that. The other thing that it included was last year adjusted yards per team pass attempt that Anthony Amico put me on, and will be that statistical history will be in the database next time I update, when I finally finish off all these models and I can get on to prospecting. I'll let you all know when that happens on Discord, Patreon, Twitter, and probably here on YouTube as well. So yeah, the adjusted yards per team pass attempt, adjusted yards per team attempt, all yards per all attempts, I should mention, actually ended up being very relevant in the last year, because pretty much, if you're not the dominant running back on your roster by the last year you play in college, you're probably not going to get very much noticed by the NFL, not going to get much opportunity, not going to produce well in the NFL as well. As a rule, mostly that's true. So that proved to be the difference maker in actually putting together the model I felt was fairly decent as well to give us a pre-draft score, having to take out physical metrics, which even I was using at the running back position before now. And the last thing was points per game over conference expectation. Now, that one, actually, I do have to get a little nerdy on you. Like, model didn't want to use it. It really didn't want to use it. It didn't improve the R-squared scored very much. In fact, it downgraded some players more than it upgraded anyone, and didn't improve the accuracy of the R-squared. So why am I using it? Because I know points per game is actually a fairly good metric for prospecting with running backs. So I wanted to use it in some capacity. The points over average for the average of their career actually ended up testing the best, and I just kind of wanted a wild card factor in there. Tell me who, signal or no, math me damned, who's doing best or best compared to past prospects in points per game for their team in that situation. And so I just threw it in there, and you can hate me if you like. It's got a low p-value, it shouldn't be in there, but it's in there. So yeah, sit in it, I guess. For some context, because like me, I'm imagining most people go to sleep when they hear R-squared numbers. Up here I have the testing for draft position. Now, if you play fantasy football, and Dynasty particularly, you're aware of the variance in draft position, right? A running back drafted in the first round is more likely to break out than a running back drafted in the second or third. We know this, and we also have a more visceral experience with it. Adrian Peterson versus Rashad Penny, right? Matt Forte was, I think, an earlier round pick than most. Aaron Jones taking a little while to break out and struggle under the oppressive root of Jamal Williams. So we know something of the visceral experience of how relevant draft capital is to succeeding in the NFL at the running back position, and how it might create a delayed effect, at least in terms of good players finally getting the opportunity they need. Now, the pre-draft model scoring, what was it? It was just on the screen. It was like a 0.22 something something. It rounds up to 23, or you can do 23%. Just think of them in terms of percentages. So how does that compare to something that you actually know what that means? What does 23% of what mean? Well, through the exact same sample, the exact same players put through the exact same test, draft round tests at around 33%, or 0.33. If I scan over to the model here, average points per game, and draft position tested slightly better, actually, in this particular sample at 34%. So the difference between the value of draft capital, knowing where they're going to be drafted, and what I'm telling you right now with my pre-draft model is about 10% of that funny little nerd score, right? So it's a lot, but the fact that we don't have draft capital, I haven't watched them. I'm just comparing raw numbers to raw numbers and adjusted numbers and putting them into a slight model. It's telling you that it does have signal, and that's hopefully gives you some idea of how much you should follow it. I'm not saying that it's going to produce a ranking of players where obviously this guy's the Saquon Barkley of the class, but it does organize them fairly successful without the most important element of their profile, especially for running back, which is draft capital, before we know anything else. And we don't even have to consider how big they are, how strong they are, or if they look good in an underwear Olympics or anything like that. And so I do find it incredibly useful for actually prospecting. So what does this all boil down to? Because I think most of the time we're looking at YouTube videos of fantasy football. You actually probably just want to hear some names of some players and, do you think they're any good? And the guy at the top of my model for the 2021 class is actually Spencer Brown, and I think my model's wrong. Maybe I shouldn't use points per game, but it does mean he's more interesting to me. He's coming from a conference with 11% hit rate, but when you dig back through it, he's coming from the Cursor West, and it's been a while since the Cursor West produced anyone of particular interest, for example. If we filter just to the Cursor West, you have Boston Scott, Aaron Jones, Kenneth Dixon, who we got high on a few years ago, and it never really came to fruition for him. Jalen Richard, who still continues to earn a role, and those are the players who were most recently drafted by the NFL coming from the Cursor West. The high hit rate is actually coming from earlier in the season when you have Matt Forte coming from that conference back in the day. Orleans Darker, if you remember him showing up as an undrafted free agent, putting in some work on the New York Giants. But Matt Forte is really the only hit in the last 20 years or so. And then you have a whole bunch of players who were lower drafted, and that's important to note, and have had some success, have proven that they're capable of sustaining some sort of role in the NFL, oftentimes being the lead back for series of times. And Aaron Jones, who profiled as the best running back from the Cursor West, to be fair, and who took a little bit of time to actually develop a role, even for the Green Bay Packers, who frankly have had a struggling RB role for a while. Jamal Williams was enough to hold him off. So given that context of his conference and what the NFL typically does, spend third, fourth round picks on the Cursor West, what we know is that Spencer Brown may show up as some sort of running back on a team deep on a depth chart, and so the pre-draft model score alone will mean that I'll keep an eye on where he's drafted. I don't think he's going to be, I don't know who he is, or if Alabama Birmingham is a particularly good, I don't know college, but I do know production in that situation compares fairly well to prospects that do well in the NFL, and given the history of the Cursor West, I think he's someone I'm going to keep an eye on. He's someone I'll spend a second, third round pick, second if it's a really desperate running back team maybe, in order to try and capture some of that Aaron Jones, Kenneth Dixon, even Orleans Darkwa spike in value so you can trade it back for a little bit extra than what you pay. Or maybe he'll get more draft capital and go to the Chiefs for all I know, in which case we can all get really excited about him. Other than that, he's not, again, I haven't heard any of my film guys like talk about the wonders of Spencer Brown or anything. It's just that his overall production in this model did fairly well. It might be, and it's worth noting, that because some players don't have stats through ages, what I've done is taken an average for draft round and replaced their stat with an average for their particular draft round in order to create a history of the model for all players, even if they missed a season or didn't have a last season to include in it. And so that could be affecting Spencer Brown. Outside of that, the model seems to be doing, as usual, a very good job of highlighting the players we're most excited about at the running back position this year. Travis Etienne is my number one running back right now. I don't have ranks. More tier-based anyway, especially until I develop more context and hear what other people, other types of information, because I don't grind film in that way, and I want to know what they look like and what their situation looked like. Was it a really good offensive line? I do want to know some context here, but Travis Etienne overall is scoring the highest in the pre-draft model, and it's by 0.1, which is actually significant given the boundaries of the way this pre-draft model breaks down. The other things I look at, because someone on Discord was literally like, I can't keep up with all this stuff, so very simple numbers I always just look at to get a sense of who a player is, and then, take however you want to take. I always look at the rushing percentage average, so the percentage of their yards that are coming from the rushing game. 85% to 80%, you're looking at a player who's probably just got a 3-down skill set. He's catching the ball and he's rushing the ball the majority of the time, and that fits in fairly well with a player that fits that 3-down skill set description in the NFL. The only real exception is Melvin Gordon to increase his receiving role, for example, when he elevates to the NFL level. Travis Etienne is occupying like 81% of his yards are coming from the rushing game, which means he's probably got a very decent receiving skill set and was used heavily in the receiving game compared to most running backs with that level of rushing volume at least. And Najee Harris comes up next. He's got an 84% rushing average. That's, again, it's a descriptive stat, not a predictive one, but it does tell me pretty much how he was playing on the field, so it's a fairly interesting one at that. Harris scores slightly below Etienne, but still in a very clear tier with it, Etienne of itself. The next guy I'm interested in is Chuba Hubbard. If you're interested in how I'm differentiating just at a glance by what this model thinks compared to how I would tier them, I'm starting to create, although it's still under construction while it's yellow, this comparison to hits, which just compares their stats directly, the percentage difference between those players and players who have had a top 12 season in the past, and those in blue over here are comparing very well, and those in red aren't comparing well. But if it's in and around 0, they're comparing pretty well to players that have been successful in the past. So Jamar Jefferson is actually slightly below average, whereas Chuba Hubbard's overall production looks more like that of a top 12 running back in the NFL, and it's actually a fairly positive comparison. Again, this is under construction. Little builder's hat I need for that sentence, but that's why I probably skipped Jamar Jefferson for Chuba Hubbard, and it's also probably a little bit of name bias because I have heard enough names rolling around right now that I know Chuba Hubbard is more well-known and probably better valued right now than Jamar Jefferson, but it also means I'm pretty much interested in Jamar Jefferson. I want to know a lot more about him. I want to see where he gets drafted. He'll be a name I keep in mind. Kenny Gainwell is another player who compares positively, but the pre-draft model put him slightly below those two of Chuba Hubbard and Jamar Jefferson, and so I'd kind of cut off the first tier right there. The other guy that compares favorably compared to this comparison and does okay in the pre-draft model is Javonte Williams. I don't know who that is. I really don't. So I have to find out a lot more about him based on what his early scores are telling me. He's someone who occupied like an 82% rushing, 82% of his yards came from the rushing game, so he's probably got a pretty decent receiving skill set as well. Brendan Knox, who you probably noticed I'm just skipping over, he's got like a 93% of his yards came from the rushing game. So unless someone wants to tell me he's Derrick Henry, he's probably out of the type of running back I'd try to prosper. But hey, everyone's good value at the right price, especially if you get some draft capital and land somewhere they might need a rusher. Again, Boston Scott's a pretty good example of that type of running back getting value, at least utility for fantasy for a little thing, using NFL stats at least. There was one other player who seems to have fallen given the new model. Oh no, Gainwell. Gainwell was it. He's got 71% of the yards come from the running back game, from the rushing game. So I'm assuming whenever I hear about Kenny Gainwell, when I finally plug back in and hear everyone else talking about them and talk to Ray GQ and Zach Reed, they're going to say he's a small guy, I guess, or at least he's more of a receiver than a rusher. Because if 70% of your yards are coming from the rushing game, then that's significantly below the average for a running back, or at least a 3-down running back. And they're probably going to view him more as a receiving back, but we'll see how that goes. If you already know more about him, then you'll know how far off I am at that. But that descriptive stat seems to be suggesting to me he's more of a receiver, which means he could have a lot of utility since we mostly play in PPR leagues right now. And his production, despite that, still compares pretty favorably to the others. So he's another one like Jamar Jefferson and Spencer Brown that I have a lot of interest in learning more about right now. So those are the early scores from the pre-draft model. Again, remember, it's 23%. Draft capital alone is going to give us, 39%. So that's going to be the real signal. But the value of this is that it gives us some kind of idea of how productive they were compared to past players. And the real key is that when I plug it in or combine production, as always, with draft capital, we get an even better signal. Where is it? Than draft capital itself. So draft capital is giving us like a 39% explanation of the variance into the NFL, but when I combine this pre-draft model with that draft capital is actually shooting up 4 or 5% in the R-squared testing. So the key will be understanding how productive they were in their situation. It does have a conference adjustment in there now, which is nice. It's got a random PPR, points per game variable, because I like to YOLO a little bit. I want to know who's very productive in their situation. It's also got a passing element to it, and looking at who got on the field early or did well in their early opportunity in yards per team pass attempt, because the model seems to think that's a good indication that players are perhaps more inclined, I guess, to get volume from coaches, would be my narrative around it. And so overall, I think it's going to work to be a pretty good model for us. But we're still largely, as always, dependent on draft and opportunity, which is kind of always the story of running back. But yeah, that's what that graph means. Hopefully it provides you some insight into it and some names that maybe you want to go run past some analysts you actually like, and see what they think. See if they think Kenny Gainwell is a receiving back, and if he can potentially get an opportunity in that role in the NFL. I don't know. Or if Jermar Jefferson is a thing. I don't know. I keep getting told different players in the database have already decided they're going back to college or retiring, because we really don't know what this class is yet. But I'm having a lot of fun trying to figure it out, whether they're or not. Appreciate you checking it out. Database is pinned to my Twitter timeline. It's pinned to my Patreon timeline for free. This is a thing I do because I find it fun. Ignore everything in the Pahowdy section. The rest is just stats. So if you want to look at any stats that they happen to have in their time in college, I'm just trying to collect it for us all so we can all play a little bit and not have to rely on, the super fantastic genius nerds to tell us. Because I'm like that. I like to know myself. And if you do too, check it out. And be sure to look at the sources tab if you do check it out, because there are a whole bunch of actual wizards that help me get the data. I'm just the one maintaining it and stuffing it in there and making weird models, things for myself and sharing them with you if you're interested. But the wizards in that source tab, they're the real heroes that are getting us access to data that otherwise we have to look at 20 different browser tabs and just plot it in our heads. They give us the opportunity to actually put it all in a line and look through it in a nice, orderly, organized manner. And if you hate that stuff, then you're probably not listening to me, to be fair. So, cool. Hope you're having a good day too. Thanks again. Again, check out that database. Check me out on Twitter, I guess, at Pahowdy, if you want to call me a nerd and tell me this stuff doesn't matter, because I'm all about that life too. Appreciate it, and I'll talk to you again when I finally finish my tie-dye model, I guess. Back to the grind. See you later. Bye. I said goodbye. Oh, I've got to stop it, right? Yeah, I forgot that. All right, I'm out. Bye.
Do you have the time?